Hi guys, it's Mrs. Rainierson here. I am back to read The War I Finally Won, and we are starting off with chapter 11. And in chapter 10, we stopped with it was Christmas Eve night, or no, they had just woken up Christmas Day, and they'd hung the stockings the night before, and in the morning the stocking was bulging with something that she never expected or wanted. I have no idea what this could be. Something never expected or wanted. I have no clue. Not even a guess. No idea. I can't think of anything. Let's just read and find out. Chapter 11. It was a doll. A soft, squishy rag doll with embroidered eyes and a permanent smile. She doesn't really seem like the type to have dolls. That's just my opinion. It had a long brown hair tied back in plaits like mine, braids, and little green ribbons like the one Susan had given me. It wore a green dress and tiny cloth shoes. I stared at it. I said, "I'm not a baby." Susan replied very quietly, "I made it for you." I knew that was nice of her. I knew I should say thank you, but I really, really didn't want a doll. Stephen White's sister had dolls, I said. I could hear my voice rising. All the girls in our lane had dolls. I used to watch them out my window playing on the stoop. I thrust the doll back at Susan. Not me. "We can make up for that," Susan said. No. What would I do with the doll? Dress it and talk to it and pretend like I was like the little girls on our lane? The girls who grew up with friends and kind mothers and 2 good feet? I told myself over and over that I was not going to lose control this Christmas. I was not going to thrash and scream. Now I could feel anger and panic building. I didn't know what to do. I stared at Susan. She stuffed the doll into the pocket of her dressing gown. "Go outdoors," she said, grabbing my shoulders and pushing me toward the door. "Run around the house a few times, fast as you can. Go." Jamie said, "Mummy made me a stuffed cat. Look." Oh, it's little baby Bovril. Susan moved him aside. "Ada needs to blow off steam." I went outside without putting on my coat. I ran through the frozen grass, the frosty air burning my lungs until I started to sweat despite the cold. My right foot ached, but Susan was right. I felt better. I knitted Christmas presents while I was in the hospital for both Susan and Jamie. I'd made mittens out of bright red yarn. I was proud of them. They didn't have any holes, and you could tell the right mittens from the left ones. But when we got ready to go to the Thornton house, I could see how their garish color clashed with Susan's dark green winter coat and navy wool hat. "You don't have to wear those," I said. "I like them," Susan said. "They're pretty, and they'll keep my hands warm." Before her house got bombed, Susan had nice leather gloves. I might have chosen a better color for my mittens if I'd been able to choose the yarn myself, if there'd been lots of yarn to choose from in the shops, which probably there wasn't. I scowled. The closer we got to the Thornton house, the harder it was to breathe. "Relax," Susan said. "They're our friends." She held a small cake she'd made as our gift to the Thorntons. It had taken most of our remaining sugar ration for the month. We climbed the stone steps to the massive front door. "Ada, if you need to calm down," Susan said, "just say, 'Excuse me,' and you and Maggie can take a walk. Go down to the stables and visit Butter." I nodded. The door swung open before we could knock. Lord Thornton, dressed in some sort of fancy war uniform, stood in front of us holding out his hand. I'd seen him once at a distance, but never close up. He was enormous. Not fat, but so tall and broad he filled the doorway. "Welcome," he said in a deep, solemn voice. "Welcome," I echoed. I bobbed my head at him, afraid to touch his outstretched hand. Lord Thornton blinked. I hope I hadn't done something wrong. "Happy Christmas," Susan said. She shifted the cake to one hand and shook Lord Thornton's hand with the other. Jamie bounced past me into the enormous front hall. "Cor," he said, "you could fly an airplane in here, a real one, a Spitfire." "Maybe not a Spitfire, but a kite for sure." "Jamie," Susan said, "get back here and wish Lord Thornton happy Christmas." "Whee!" yelled Jamie, running the length of the hall. "Hey there, sport." A tall, thin man, very like Lord Thornton, but much younger and not nearly as intimidating, grabbed Jamie around the waist. He tossed Jamie over his shoulder and brought him back to Lord Thornton. "Shake hands like a gentleman," he said. Jamie, upside down and giggling, shook Lord Thornton's hand with his left hand, the one that wasn't in plaster. The man shifted Jamie higher onto his shoulder and smiled at me. I'm Jonathan Thornton, he said. You must be my sister's friend. I shook his hand. Ada Smith, I said. My manners came back to me. Pleased to meet you, Lieutenant Thornton. Susan had told me to say that. He bent forward. Call me Jonathan, he said. In the RAF, we're not much for rank, and I'll call you Ada, shall I? Happy Christmas. Maggie ran in just as Lord Thornton was offering Susan something called an aperitif, like an appetizer, maybe a drink. Happy Christmas, she said. I'm so glad you're here. She whispered in my ear. Dinner's going to be inedible. I just came from the kitchen. Mom's having kittens. I whispered back. We brought cake. Lord Thornton led us into an impossibly grand room with glossy furniture, carpet woven in flowered patterns, and bookcases that reached from wall to wall and floor to ceiling. Thornton House was miles fancier than Susan's old house, which had been the nicest place I'd ever seen. I grabbed Maggie's arm. I'm glad I already know you, I said. Otherwise, I'd be afraid of all of this. Maggie rolled her eyes. Pish, she said, as if you're ever afraid. Maggie's house had an entire room just for eating in. The table was so big that 20 chairs could fit around it, and they had 20 chairs in this room. I counted. The extras stood against the walls. Lady Thornton came from wherever the kitchen was, looking harassed, and we all sat down. Each place at the table had a plate surrounded by 3 glasses, 2 knives, 3 spoons, and 2 forks. I froze. What were we supposed to do with all of that? Hey, Jamie called out. Why have got so many forks and things? Lord Thornton grimaced, as though he'd spilled his aperitif down his trousers. Susan leaned forward, but Jonathan spoke first. They're extras, he said, in case she flings them on the floor. His smile lit the table. Isn't that right, Mater? Mater must have meant Lady Thornton, because she smiled back. We're having 3 courses, she told Jamie. I didn't know what courses were, and I didn't think Jamie did either. 3 courses, said Jonathan. It must be Christmas. We don't get 3 courses in the Air Force. Jamie leaned over. It is Christmas, he whispered. Right, Jonathan whispered back. You having a good one? Presents and all that? Candy, Jamie said, and a cat. And Bovril got a mouse. Excellent. Bovril's our cat, I explained. A real one, not a toy. So the boy got a toy cat, and the cat got a toy mouse, or a real one. A toy mouse, Jamie said, wide-eyed. Bovril would crunch a real one. Probably would. Ah, good, Jonathan said. I knew that the Thorntons' housekeeper, the only servant remaining out of the bunches that they had had before the war, was cooking the dinner. Maggie said she was a terrible cook, but I didn't believe it until the food started coming out. I can cook. Susan teaches me. It isn't hard. Christmas dinner started with bowls of greasy, salty soup, slices of crumbly gray war bread, and celery sticks. Apparently, that was the first course. I ate everything. I'd had plenty worse. It made me feel calmer that the food was so bad. Jamie nibbled his bread, ignored his soup, crossed 2 pieces of celery into his left hand, and threw them in circles over his plate. Knock it off, Jonathan said quietly. They'll banish you to the nursery, even if it is Christmas. Jamie blinked and put his celery airplane in his lap. Meanwhile, Susan and Lady Thornton were discussing fire watching. It was something they were going to be doing with the WVS. The phrase itself, fire watching, seemed unsettling. Whose fires will you be watching, I asked. And why do they need to be watching? No one's, I hope, Lady Thornton said. We'll be keeping a lookout for bombs from the church steeple. Bombs or incendiaries from the church steeple. They were small bombs designed to start fires. I said, from the steeple, you'll really need a long ladder to get up there. Maggie grinned at me. There's stairs. I grinned back. When Maggie knew things I didn't mind. The joint, a big piece of roasted beef, came in along with a platter of vegetables and a massive Yorkshire pudding. It smelled fantastic, but it tasted awful. Dry as sawdust, as though it had been finished cooking sometime the day before and then sat shriveling in the hot oven overnight. That sounds terrible. Jamie murmured something under his breath. I thought it was probably a quote from the Swiss Family Robinson and hoped he wouldn't repeat it. Susan took a bite and chewed. And chewed. And chewed. Yuck. Mmm, said Lord Thornton. I thought you said she could cook. He lifted an eyebrow at Lady Thornton. Lady Thornton shook her head. I didn't think anyone could butcher roast beef. It was funny. Butcher roast beef. Without thinking, I laughed. Maggie jumped, startled. Jonathan grinned. I looked at Susan, anxious, but then Lord Thornton let out a rough sort of gruff. Quite, he said. Butcher roast beef. Quite. He put his napkin up to his eyes and started to chuckle. Then he laughed. Lady Thornton laughed. Susan and Jonathan and Maggie laughed. After a moment, I felt safe enough to laugh again, too. Why aren't there Christmas crackers? Lord Thornton said. None in the shops, I suppose. Lady Thornton shook her head. Pity. I think this whole day would go more smoothly if we had all had silly hats on our head. He passed the gravy boat to Susan. Drown your meat, my dear. It can only help. Halfway through the dried beef course, Susan turned to Lord Thornton and said, I wonder if you might be able to help me find a job. I looked up, surprised. Lord Thornton raised his eyebrows. A job, he said. What sort of job? Something I could do from here so I could stay with the children, Susan said. Lady Thornton thought you might know of a project I could help with. Analytics, say. Analytics, said Lord Thornton. Well, yes, said Susan, or some other type of computational work. There must be war projects or industrial things that aren't classified. Susan's face was turning pink. She persisted. I'm sure I'm rusty, but with a bit of time to bone up. Come, Lady Thornton cut in. Don't look so astonished. Don't you know her credentials? Credentials? Lord Thornton wiped his mustache. He said to Susan, I know you as a spinster who was Becky Montgomery's friend, the quiet one. She's got a first from Oxford in math. And maths. Maths? Lady Thornton said. A first from Oxford? It was becoming amusing how Lord Thornton kept repeating things people said to him. Susan's face was bright pink now, but when she spoke, her voice was firm. My concentration was numerical analysis. You're joking, Lord Thornton said. Susan's eyes flashed. She lifted her chin. She wasn't joking. I can find you work immediately, Lord Thornton said. I know just the department. You'll have to put the children into schools. No, said Susan. It'd be easy enough. Ada could go with Margaret, and we'd find a good place for the boy. Away from Jamie? Let alone me at Maggie's posh school. I could never. No, Susan said firmly. The children and I stay here. A wash of relief squelched my panic at its start. But I need to do work, Susan said, and I'd be better off using my education than clerking in a shop in the village, which is the only obvious local opportunity. I'm stunned, Lord Thornton said, flabbergasted. I had no idea. Yes, we can all see you've thoroughly underestimated her, Lady Thornton said. She rolled her eyes at Susan, who responded with a slight smile. Well, I apologize for doing so. Lord Thornton poured a bit more gravy over his shards of meat. And yes, I probably can find you something. Don't know what, but I'll have a poke around. I'll be in touch. Thank you, Susan said. After the third course, Susan's cake, we went into the room next door. The Thorntons gave us all Christmas presents. Jamie got a set of toy soldiers that had once been Jonathan's. Susan got a sewing machine. It's too much, she protested, running her finger over the shiny metal wheel. Lady Thornton waved her hand. It was in the housekeeper's room, she said. No one's used it in years. I hope it works, and if not, I hope you can repair it. I got a book, a thick, heavy one. Margaret told me you like words, Lady Thornton said. She thought you'd find this useful. I did like words, but I didn't understand what Lady Thornton meant until I opened the book. It was full of words, all the words in the world and what they meant. It's a dictionary, Lord Thornton said. Susan can show you how to use it. I looked at the first page. A. Aardvark. What a funny word. A-R-D-V-A-R-K. A nocturnal burrowing mammal with long ears, a tubular snout, and a long, extensive tongue. I laughed. A tubular snout and long, extensible tongue. Even if I didn't know what the words tubular and extensible meant, that sounded fabulous. I looked up at Lord and Lady Thornton. Thank you. Maggie poked her mother. Told you she'd love it, she said. Lady Thornton smiled. I see that now. I waited until we were putting on our coats to go home to give my gift to Maggie. I knitted her a little neck wrap in a fancy pattern Susan found for me. I showed Maggie how to unbutton it for writing, I said. It'll keep you warm, but it can't get caught in the rain like a scarf might. I love it, Maggie said. Well done, Susan murmured on the walk home. She held Jamie's hand but didn't try to take mine. Both of you, your manners were very nice. I was proud of you. At home, Susan and I put up the blackouts and Jamie swept out the fire. Susan made tea and fresh scones. She saved some sugar back for them, and while we ate by the fire, she read us a long, funny Christmas story about ghosts and a man who started out mean but turned out nice at the end. It was the sort of story you hoped might be true. Why did you ask Lord Thornton about a job? I said when we were gathering up our cups and saucers and banking the fire for bed. He's got a mathematical background himself, Susan said. Whatever he's doing for the war, I suspect he's using it. Plus, he's the sort of man that has connections. Lady Thornton suggested I ask him. Whatever Lord Thornton's war work was, it was secret. He wouldn't tell a thing about it. If you get a job, will you earn enough to keep us? I asked. Stop, Susan said. Lady Thornton's in charge of the paperwork for evacuees. She said she'll continue your and Jamie's stipend for the duration of the war. I am merely preparing for the future. That and I should like to feel useful again. You're 11 years old, Susan said. You get to be the child now, Ada, for once in your life. I will be the adult. She paused. You really don't want the doll, do you? I didn't say anything right away. Coals cracked in the grate. Jamie rubbed Bovril's belly, and the cat stretched, long, hooking his claws into the rug. It's all right if you don't, Susan said. I needed a doll a long time ago, I said. It's too late for me to have one now. Susan studied me. I wish that wasn't true, she said, but it was true, and she didn't try to talk me out of thinking it. Susan was good that way. I'll give you a different present. You don't need to. I leaned against Susan's shoulders. I survived Christmas. That gift was enough. We're going to stop right there. I'm kind of thinking maybe in chapter 12 that Lord Thornton will find a job for Susan. That's my prediction. All right, guys, we'll see you next time.